Today, Phil Phails at Narcissism. We're gonna talk about narcissism today.
Yeah, we hear it a lot.
I want to start with the Greek story, which I told myself I was gonna like research it before you got here, but I didn't. I'm gonna do it by memory, and you can help me.
Yeah.
Phil Phails for you. Like the idea is this guy, Narcissus. He went to this lake and saw his reflection in the water of the lake and stood there and just admired it and looked at it forever until he died.
Yes. And then he withered away and turned into a flower, I think is how it ended.
He turned into a flower?
I think so. I think that's how it ended. I actually looked it up again last night.
You did?
Yeah.
And he withered away and turned into a flower?
I think it was, he was so in love with himself that he turned away any bids for attention or love. Yeah. So he just became so in love with himself that he just stared at his reflection until he just withered away.
Narcissus. Dang, guy. And that's the foundation for this personality disorder that we're going to talk about through the lens of relationship, how it shows up in relationship, how it shows up.
Yeah, we can talk about how it shows up in clinical setting, how it shows up in relationships, how it shows up in our modern day culture, I
just want to know how every girl I know found out how to clinically diagnose this thing, because it seems like every woman I know is able to clinically diagnose one of their ex-boyfriends as narcissist. I have been clinically diagnosed by some people that weren't they weren't therapists, but they were very confident.
Of course.
Like, this dude's he's a narcissist.
Yeah.
I'm like, you sure? I just was like wanting to go to band practice,
well, that will kind of lead into that, I think, right? Is because what I would say is that, this person, a narcissist, you're hearing it a lot in our culture. But what we don't talk about is maybe the traits of narcissism and what differentiates narcissistic traits between narcissistic traits and then a full-blown personality disorder, someone that meets clinical criteria for that diagnosis, right? Narcissistic traits are not all bad. We need them actually for self-preservation. We all have an ego, and without having a sense of self, we're not able to have boundaries or protect ourselves. So we have to have some, ability to form a sense of self that is self-focused, I guess. Yeah.
So we all have narcissistic traits.
Yeah, sure.
And some of them are healthy. Some of them are normal and healthy.
Yeah, I would say in a lot of individuals that have have a higher expression of what one might perceive as narcissistic. There can be a lot of charisma, a lot of confidence. It's not all bad, right? There's a difference between that trait becoming something that impacts your life in a way that is pathological, where maybe it looks more like an excessive need for power or control or dominance.
Yeah.
It can even bleed into antisocial behavior patterns and, things like that.
Yeah, you said charisma. Now all I'm doing is trying to think of what the kids call that now. Is it Rizzler? Rizz?
Rizz.
Is that Rizz? That's charisma?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're using it right.
Rizz.
Yeah.
Just so everybody out there knows what Jamie's talking about, sometimes people with narcissistic personality disorder have mad Rizz.
I have the Rizz. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Goodness. And what are some of the positive ones? You talked about self-protection or having a positive self-image. There's probably parts of it like, I'm beautiful, I'm smart, I'm strong.
Right.
All those are,
I would say, positive. It could be someone who might have higher traits of narcissism can also be very charismatic and can bring people together, and you see this a lot in positions of where people excel in their job because they're able to bring people together in ways that, maybe is there some self-indulgence there? I don't know. But if you're able to gravitate, if you're able to bring a big group of people together and they're
Yeah.
able to, unite people in a specific way because you have the ability to capture a room, with your own charisma, I don't know, that's not inherently a bad quality,
I
right?
guess it depends on what you do with that
It depends
room.
on I think it's what you do with it.
Because we talked about earlier, before we started, this influence. Like, we're easily influenced. So once
Sure.
you have someone's attention, how are you influencing them?
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, another thing that I think is important, and we don't hear it discussed in this way, but narcissism exists on a spectrum.
It does?
Yeah. So we hear, I think when it's referred to in modern culture, we talk most about the grandiosity.
We talk about Trump, yo. I'm just kidding.
Sure, there's lots
But
of
no, we do.
there's
People do
lots
say
of, self-importance and crazy attention, validation.
so that's the grandiose side.
Yeah,
That's this like narcissism out of balance.
Yeah, it could be more when you have these high traits of grandiosity, you might require excessive admiration, or you might even exploit individuals or manipulate individuals to get your needs met. So you can see there's some maladaptive qualities there,
Right.
things that are not helpful.
And antisocial too.
It can, and often narcissistic personality disorder overlaps with other personality disorders,
Like
and that
coexisting conditions or comorbidities.
Yeah,
Is that what you call them?
yeah. So there you can see a lot of the similar traits in individuals that might have borderline tendencies or antisocial behavior, and then of course there's sort of a cluster of personality disorder called the cluster B. So borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and then histrionic personality disorder. So
Those are clustered together?
yeah, they're kind of clustered together. So you see a lot of those traits kind of overlap, but
The only one of those I'm not familiar with is the histrionic.
yeah. So it can be a really strong need for attention-seeking behaviors, but on a grand scale.
Okay.
So that can lead to exploitation, things like that. Yeah.
So on one side of this spectrum, we have grandiosity, grandiose,
yeah.
narcissism.
Yeah.
What's on the other side?
Narcissistic vulnerability.
Narcissistic. Is that like the perpetual victim?
It's like the perpetual victim, someone that's super hypersensitive. They might be really emotionally reactive. Yeah. And
Someone who pretends to be sick all the time, maybe? Is that one?
Well,
What
I
is that
would say-
called? You know what I'm saying?
yes,
I forget the word for it. Anyway,
someone
that's like, I'm sick all the time. If you watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it was Ferris's friend. He was always sick.
I know exactly what you're thinking of, and it's just escaping me right now.
Me too. That's okay. If someone knows what we're talking about, put it in the comments, and we'll know then.
Yeah. So I would say, it shows up. That is more, so we talk about the grandiose narcissism as more of the overt narcissistic traits, but the narcissistic vulnerability is much more covert, and it's not as maybe easily identifiable.
Really?
Yeah. So it might be harder to identify someone as being overly self-indulgent in their own victimhood, but that's certainly a thing.
Because it could be victims.
Yeah, they could actually be victims.
They could actually be victims,
for sure.
but also overindulging in it, that's harder to figure out.
It can be harder to figure out, and I think one way to maybe break that down might be the inability to see how your own behavior is feeding a specific dynamic. So if you're constantly seeing yourself in this place of victimhood across a bunch of different environments, and it's like everything is happening to me all the time, and this is congruent across a variety of different settings. Maybe this person finds themselves in a place of victimhood in their personal relationships, or maybe it shows up in their place of work.
Yep.
So when you see it cross different contexts, then I would say that you're starting to see more of that pathological behavior.
It's a strategy that they have for getting attention or getting some kind of social stimuli
Well,
or
what I would say, and I think this is super important, is that when I think about narcissism, it's important to understand that if we're really being empathetic, that those narcissistic traits on both ends come from a place of pain. They usually emerge from a place of
there's trauma
yeah,
underneath that.
there's usually, and that's usually indicative in their family system in early childhood where, they might have had a rupture, an attachment with their primary caregiver, and that can look a lot of different ways. So it's interesting. And so when you think about it, you can imagine how somebody that has really high grandiosity appears on the outside to have a ton of self-confidence, but at the core, that sense of self is very fragile
Yeah.
because their sense of themself, they have difficulty seeing other people as their own individuals, but more as an extension of themselves. So if you think of it, an example of that might be a parent who is overly critical of their child for, really focuses on love being attached to achievement, academic pursuits, or, you know, but they're kind of living vicariously through
Yeah.
their child. And when that child doesn't meet the mark, that's a reflection. They're perceiving that as a reflection.
Because their love is
Yeah.
conditional. They've shown
Like
them the conditions.
transactional.
Yeah, transactional.